Welcome to a Legendarium special about the extraordinary life of Robert Louis Stevenson. This is part one in a two-part series. Born in Edinburgh, Scotland, Stevenson was the only child of Thomas Stevenson and Margaret Balfour. Born in the year 1850, he inherited the weak lungs of his mother and became an invalid from birth. Before Stevenson's second birthday, a young woman named Alison Cunningham became his nurse. Stevenson dedicated a child's garden of verses to Miss Cunningham over 30 years later. Despite his illness, during the summer he lived in the country house at Colinton, Mains. He played outdoors with his many cousins. At age 6, Stevenson competed against his cousins in an athletic event organized by his family. By winning, Stevenson won a prize from one of his Balfour uncles, namely a History of Moses, and this began Stevenson's love of the written word. At age 7, Stevenson began attending school, but poor health meant that he only sometimes attended. At age 16, Stevenson wrote the Book of Joseph about a failed rebellion by Scottish Covenanters in 1666, precisely 200 years ago at the time of his writing. At the age of 16, Stevenson began attending the University of Edinburgh, planning to become a lighthouse engineer like his father. Yet instead of applying himself to his studies, he became known for his outrageous dress and behavior. Sporting a wide-brimmed hat and a boy's velveteen coat, Stevenson became known as Velvet Jacket. In the company of his cousin Bob, Stevenson smoked hashish and visited brothels in the seedy side of town. His spirit of adventure also began to appear, and during his summer vacations, Stevenson traveled to France to be around young artists, writers, and painters. Though Stevenson's father doubted the value of an education, he became deeply disappointed with his son's poor performance and lack of focus. At age 22, Stevenson declared himself an agnostic, crowning his deeply pious father's disappointment in him. To appease his father, Stevenson studied the law but never practiced. While at university, Stevenson also trained himself to be a writer by imitating the styles of William Hazlitt and Daniel Defoe. A constant traveler for most of his adult life, he based his first two books, An Inland Voyage and Travels with a Donkey, on his excursions in France. An Inland Voyage provides an account of his trip from Antwerp to northern France, which he made in a canoe on the River Oise. It is also possible that young Stevenson invented the sleeping bag during this vacation. In An Inland Voyage, Stevenson wrote of creating a sleeping sack, 6 feet square in size. Large enough that he had to move it by donkey, Stevenson claimed to have made it from green waterproof cart cloth for the outside and blue sheep's fur for the inside. During these travels, Stevenson met a woman named Fanny Vandergrift Osborne in Paris. Although Stevenson fell in love with her, Fanny returned to her California home and her husband in 1878. In August 1879, Stevenson received a mysterious cable from her and responded by immediately leaving Scotland for the United States. On August 18, 1879, Stevenson landed in New York, having traveled in steerage across the Atlantic. Already ill, his health became worse as a result of crossing the Great Plains in an emigrant train. Impoverished, sick, and hungry, he lived in Monterey and then San Francisco, nearly dying in both places from malaria. His suffering would be rewarded, for Fanny obtained a divorce from her husband, and on May 19, 1880, she and Stevenson married. For the honeymoon, the couple, Fanny's son Lloyd, and the family dog took a 3-week honeymoon to an abandoned silver mine in the Napa Valley. Although nothing of the Stevenson cabin remains, the location has been marked on the trail to the summit of Mount St. Helena, and a nearby park is named after Stevenson. This latest excursion inspired his books Silverado Squatters and Across the Plains. He, Fanny, and Lloyd eventually settled in a Braemar cottage during summer 1881. Lloyd, Stevenson's 12-year-old stepson, became confined inside the cottage during a school holiday because of constant rain, so he amused himself by drawing pictures. In time, Stevenson joined him and drew a map of an exotic island. He filled it in with place names like Spyglass Hill and marked the location of hidden treasures buried by pirates. This, of course, would become the titular island in his most famous book, Treasure Island, which we will discuss in part 2. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.